Well, you're probably familiar with the concept of jury duty, where members of the community are randomly invited to participate and sit on a jury and pass judgment. It's but one example of where ordinary people, and I sort of say that carefully, like you and me, can participate in an important structure of our state. And there's even a citizens' jury engaging with human genome editing. Made up of 24 ordinary Aussies, the jury met over the weekend in Canberra, tackling topics as diverse as whether scientists should be able to change our genes to prevent disease or create superhumans. Professor Dianne Nicol is Director of the Centre for Law and Genetics at the University of Tasmania, and she's been good enough to join us now. Hello, Di.
Hello, Jane. Really pleased to be talking to you.
Oh, similarly, welcome back home from Canberra.
Yes. I'm coming back from a really chilly Canberra. I keep telling people it's much warmer in Tasmania than it is in Canberra, but nobody believes me.
I know. Well, we need to just kind of keep cultivating that myth that it's always cold, it's always raining, and that way it's just how we like it. Well, look,
indeed.
Di, 24 or a dozen or so, no, 24 perfectly ordinary Australians in Canberra with you over the weekend, examining how Australia might make up its mind up about complex issues such as genome editing. It's incredible. How's this group of ordinary Aussies assembled?
It's quite a convoluted process to choose them. I mean, basically what we do is we put a call out for people who might be interested in talking about these things with us. And we went through a recruitment company called Dynata, who does these sorts of things all the time. And we asked them to put out a few questions on, people who might be interested in various aspects of genetics. And we had several hundred people come back to us. And then we wanted to select the group to make sure we sort of represented the diversity of people around Australia. So geographically, based on age, based on gender, based on education and religious beliefs and so on, but also based on their views of technology. So we asked them a few questions and we selected people to make sure we had diverse views, people who were really pro-technology, others who were a little bit more reticent, and some who were at completely the other end. So we brought them together so that we could have as rich a discussion as possible with them.
And was it successful? Did you have a rich discussion?
We did indeed. I keep referring to these people as extraordinary Australians rather than ordinary because they sat together and talked about this really complex science for about, I think it must be about 20, even more than 20 hours all up over the 4 days. So it was pretty intense.
Well, it would be intense, and that's quite a complicated process to manage when you're bringing such a diverse group of people together with obviously sort of clear outcomes for what you and your colleagues were looking for. Mm-hmm. Did you find that there was a sort of a willingness to be open-minded and respectful debate ensued?
All of that, yes. So we actually brought in a group of experts from science, from ethics, sociology, and so on, who I knew are really, really good communicators. And they just did a great job of engaging with the participants, and the participants were given the opportunity basically to ask them any questions that they wanted. And then once the experts had done their things, the participants were left to do their own discussions, both in small groups and then the group as a whole. And it was just so fascinating to see. I was just blown away by how people really understood what the science issues were, what the legal and ethical and social issues were, really picked up on them quickly and really debated it at a very high level. So exciting stuff.
If you've just joined me, it's about 16 minutes away from news at 4 o'clock. Jane Longhurst here on ABC Radio Hobart, ABC Northern Tasmania. My guest is Professor Dianne Nicol, who is Director of the Centre for Law and Genetics at UTAS. And as you hear, there's been this remarkable 4-day block with I'm going to say 24 extraordinary Australians who have come together to help with Di and her colleagues sort of wrap their head around, as you say, Di, really complex issues around things like genome editing. How often do you bring the jury together?
So it's interesting. I'm working with a group of people from the University of Canberra who are sort of world-leading experts on this concept of citizens' juries. And they've done quite a number over the years, tackling really complex issues like climate change, of course, but, those sorts of questions. This is the first example in Australia, I think, where we've tackled this issue of genome editing. So do you want me to explain a little bit?
Yes, well, I must admit, you'd be very good at explaining genome editing, I suspect, Di. Please explain.
So basically, I think people will know that your genes are really important in sort of directing what we do, how we function as human beings. And when there are problems in our genes, we can contract all sorts of really potentially terrible diseases. Some of the big diseases like sickle cell disease, cystic fibrosis, some forms of cancer and so on, all can arise if there are problems with our genes. And actually working out how to correct those problems has been something that's been taxing the minds of the most brilliant scientists for years and years. And this new technique that's been developed that allows very precise modifications to our genes, very small changes that really correct these hiccups in our genetic makeup. And it was discovered about 5 or so years ago. And over that time, it's been refined and refined in the laboratory. And people are just starting to think about how it can be used in adults and in children to correct some of the terrible diseases that some of us can suffer from. But there's also issues about, how far can we go with this? Should we be really thinking about correcting diseases that can be passed on to future generations? And this is where you get into the big ethical and social questions. Should we go that far to create so-called heritable changes?
Say that word again.
Heritable. Things that can be inherited by our children, our children's children, and so on. And you can just imagine that's a pretty big ethical question.
Hugely so. You could just spend 4 days talking about that. Yeah, is gene editing used in everyday life already, Professor Dianne Nicol?
It's not at the moment. So it's still very much a research method. And there are some so-called clinical trials going on at the moment. So clinical trials are where it's the sort of first testing in humans to see if it actually works. And I guess everybody's a little bit more familiar with clinical trials now than they were in the past, because that's what happened with the COVID vaccines. They were tested with a small number of people first. And it's only after they're shown to be safe that it can actually be used as a mainstream treatment in the clinic. And we're not there yet with gene editing, but there's a real promise that it might be able to be used sometime in the future.
And one of the kind of, I guess, the complexities of this is sort of, I imagine, did your group of 24-odd extraordinary Australians sort of discuss at length what that meant ethically in terms of sort of this idea, and it seems almost like the realm of science fiction, but I'm sure you're going to tell me, no, the future is now, in terms of sort of how we might try and alter a person's genetic profile for a particular need or purpose or end.
Yes. So we discussed that at length, and I think participants were generally positive about the possibilities associated with this technology. Certainly, if it can be used really to help treat some of these terrible diseases. But then I think everybody was concerned about the risk that changes could be made that are inherited. And I think they all agreed that it's too early to be thinking about that yet. whether, it might be possible to think about that in the future, but we really need to see it becoming a little bit more part of mainstream clinical practice for consenting adults before we get to that point.
Well, it's all so fascinating because we will get to that point, I've no doubt. Professor Dianne Nicol, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. We'll have to leave it there, but we really appreciate this rare insight you've given us.
That's great. Thanks a lot for talking to me, Jane. It was great. Bye.
Bye-bye. Professor Dianne Nicol there, who is the Director of the Centre for Law and Genetics at UTAS.